Have you ever been to a pro tournament and you walk up on a court and you hear that sound? That pop, pop, and you're like, what is going on over there? It sounds like the ball is exploding off the racket, but it never sounds that way when I'm hitting the ball. In this video, I'm gonna show you how to make more of that sound on your forehand. How can your contact feel like what the pros are doing? And that's caused because they're making great contact and they're extending and staying with the ball. And most recreational players get this confused. They're coming off the ball, they're trying to manipulate things so much when the pros are actually doing something very simple that you can start doing today to start adding more velocity and more impact to your ball. So let's get started. So what's that thing? What's that thing that makes that ball sound like that? Well, one thing is they're creating a lot of racket at speed. And that's super important if you want to start cracking the ball. But another thing that's really important that we're going to talk about in this video is how at contact they're staying with the ball. So many recreational players are getting caught up with the lag and snap and the windshield this, and there are places for it, especially if you're learning how to accelerate your racket more and you're trying to add more topspin, but it's got to be done in the right way. And that means making sure that when we're hitting the ball, we're extending through the ball longer. And this is so interesting. We look at pros and we don't see that. What we see is this. We see them set up and we see in a flash, the racket goes through the ball and instantly they're at their finish. And so what do we want to do? We want to copy that. Hit, flash, finish. But when we slow it down, look at Rafael Nadal's forehand. What do you see? You think you see it coming across soon, but what you really see is he has a lot of extension before he starts coming across. Same thing with Roger Federer. A lot of extension before coming across, and the same thing with Djokovic. The same pattern keeps showing up. And a quick way to distinguish this is if you draw a line through the center of me, they keep their hitting hand arm on the hitting arm side much longer than most players. Most players are instantly making contact and swiping across, where they're making contact, staying with the ball, and almost making a straight line with the racket in their arm and then coming across. And this is so important to understand why they're doing this, because they're trying to stay with the ball. They're using their body to generate all this force going, and they want to keep it on the ball. The moment where we start pulling off the ball, we can't apply that force to the ball. This video is going to be all about implementing, making sure that you stay on that hitting arm side longer before you start coming across, which will add to you having more penetration on the ball. Now, here's the other thing I think that comes into people's mind when they think extension, extending through the ball. Like, I don't want to hit the ball flat. I want to hit the ball that has safety and topspin. Well, you still can. I mean, just look at Nadal. His ball is probably one of the heaviest balls, if not the heaviest ball in the game. And this guy's extending all the way through. The difference is, before he starts to extend, his racket's below the ball and he's extending up and through. Where you see different variations of players maybe extending straight out. But that's up to you about how much spin you want to hit. The key is you see them all extending through the ball. So now let's do some drills to help you make sure you're staying with the ball and not pulling off the ball. The more you pull off the ball, the more shanks you're going to have, less power you're going to have. And even though you think you're adding spin, it's very manipulated and you don't have that spin with penetration. And that's what we all want. That's what creates that popping sound, because they're penetrating the ball, but they have enough spin on it to keep the ball in. Before we start doing these drills, there's one thing we need to talk about to make sure you have solid contact, which is your wrist position. What should it be? This is another area where I think a lot of recreational players struggle with, is understanding where their wrist should be. So I'm going to just name these positions so you have a good a way of understanding. Is that this is a neutral position, meaning that my wrist is nice and flat. This is extended, meaning I'm going to pull it all the way back, and this is flexed. And so what I want you to do right now is take your arm and make it completely extended, 90 degrees. You're going to feel like it's tight. You're like, I can't do this. Well, don't worry, you won't have to. But think of this as 90 degrees going up, and this is flat. We want to go like 45 degrees, which creates a nice comfortable bend. Now, what does that mean? Meaning that when I hold my racket, I don't want a neutral wrist. This is completely flat. I want it up. And you do see players sometimes with it being flat in the start, but what you consistently see is at contact, they have an extended wrist, meaning it's slightly back, okay? You don't generally see wrist way back here at contact. That's going to be really stressful for your wrist to even hold it there. And so it's really important to understand that when I'm holding my racket in my forehand grip, there's going to be that 90 degree or 45 degree angle of extension that I want to have going through the ball. Once I have this extension, I just want to keep it, maintain it through the ball all the way through. Now, do you see players creating spin and the racket moving? Certain situations do call for that. When players are trying to hit maybe angles or last minute balls that are low, when they're trying to create more brush, they do rotate their wrist up. This is called radial deviation, where they're just going to add this spin, and that spin helps bring the ball down. But what you do see is a kind of passive wrist as it's below the ball. They're going through the ball, and then the wrist comes around, and that's what we're going to work on. But the problem is most recreational players wind up doing this action. They're putting so much work into it compared to letting it go out and extend and then come around the proper way. So let's get started with some drills to help you work on this so you can start making that popping sound with your forehand. So the very first drill we're going to do is really simple. We're going to make sure as we grab a racket, we're in a extended state, which means we're not super extended all the way up, just a little bit. And then I'm gonna set my racket with the butt of the racket looking at the target or the flashlight. I like to say this lines up like a flashlight. And all I'm gonna do is push through the ball. Now, making sure that when I make contact, the strings are gonna keep going through the ball on my extend. I'm gonna probably extend more exaggerated than normal. So it'll look like this. You can really see with a little effort, the ball is definitely solid and it's moving, okay? This is where you want to start feeling how that feels. That's the solid feel you want. Now, a couple of things you want to make sure you're not doing is snapping. We don't want flexion through contact. We don't want the racket snapping this way. Racket should be nice and solid, and as I hit and even past contact, then we're going to keep the racket there, and then we're going to work on how we release it to a neutral state, and that's what we're going to do next. So once you get really comfortable with this, what we want to start doing is just relaxing, and this is where we want to let the racket and the hand go back to a neutral plane. So what that means is, as I'm hitting, boom, I'm letting the racket go forward. It almost makes like a straight line here. If I'm hitting, it goes contact with the extension, I'm going through, and then I relax. And what happens on that relaxation at the end is the racket head is allowed to go forward, which actually puts my wrist in more of a neutral plane, a flat plane. And so it almost makes where your racket and your hand make this straight line. So it'll look like this. And again, this is done completely after I make contact. I'm making solid contact, and at the end, I'm letting my racket come around, which starts this process of then bending my elbow to bring my racket to my finish. Where a lot of recreational players mess up is they make contact, instantly start pulling the racket off the ball, and you get this kind of finish, or you get them even muscling over here, where you see the pros accelerating and letting that racket go forward, and that's what you want. The looser I can be here and letting my hand get into this flashlight position and pulling it to the ball and extending and then releasing to the outside, sometimes I call this the outside of the ball, then you can let the racket come around. And so now that we've went from straight, I'm really trying to keep that straight, and you can see how I'm extending, let it come around. I'm gonna go straight, and it's gonna start to come around and come around, and you'll still continue to have that solid contact versus pulling off the ball. And lastly, what you can do is have a ball machine feed you a ball, and this gets you a time where you're going to start working on the ball coming, hitting, and extending through. So now I'm going to start with my racket in the flashlight position, and what I'm going to do is start working on how to hit more spin on the ball, which is getting the racket lower. So as I'm really getting the racket lower, I'm still driving out, keeping the racket on the right side of my body longer compared to doing this action and pulling off the ball. I want to really make sure that I'm driving through the ball, but still, if I want spin, I hit a heavy ball there just by getting under, and still I'm accelerating and hitting a pretty heavy ball while extending through the ball, which allows me to have that popping sensation on the ball. And this is so important if you want to start driving through the ball, but keeping the spin on the ball that allows you to be safe. So many players I feel like think it's like one or the other. I can either drive definitely flat and make a lot of mistakes, or I have to hit a ton of spin. I'm bathing the ball. You can have the best of both worlds. Now there's one more thing you need to know, this is so important, is how to use your body. We've now really focused on how to make sure we're driving through contact, but we need that velocity we talked about in the beginning. So the keys to having velocity and using your body is watching this video, because it's going to show you exactly how the pros use their body to generate that speed. And when you combine these two things together, using your body, generating the speed, and staying on the ball, you're going to start seeing that crack and hearing that crack on the ball when you hit it.